SDGs and big data. So I guess we will just start now. I will start by introducing the purpose of this afternoon's, at least in European context, this afternoon's webinar on big data and the SDGs. Now, it's an initiative taken by the task team on big data for the SDGs, which we are responsible for at Statistics Denmark, myself together with my colleague Maciek. I hope you can see my presentation. What we would like to achieve during this webinar, and I should mention that the webinar is kind of a run-up to the activities that we are going to have in Dubai in January, part of the Expo2020. What we would like to achieve during this webinar is to get some concrete examples of the follow-up on the SDGs with the use of non-traditional data in order to get knowledge about that and in order to inspire each other in relation to how to cover all the indicators attached to the SDGs. And also to discuss possibilities for the future in follow-up on the SDGs with use of these kind of new and non-traditional data sources to exchange experiences, which is why we have a number of specific presentations today that are experiences on the using of these kind of data for the SDGs. And as I mentioned, also to build up to the World Expo workshop in Dubai in late January 2022. So that's what we are here for today. And the agenda is as follows. So I will just give a short welcome, which I'm doing right now, and then I will do some short introduction to the activities of the task teams on big data for the SDGs. And then we have 4 presentations that will follow my introduction here. The first one is on citizen-generated data by Dilek Frashi, then on indicator 661 by Stuart Crane, on indicator 9C1 and 1781 by Sinesco and Esperanza, and then on indicator 911 on by Ashushi Lini from the World Bank. And then based on the presentations and comments that you might have or questions, there'll be just a short part with conclusions. We have 1.5 hours for this, so I hope there will be plenty of time both to get a good insight into the presentations and also for those of you who are participating to pose questions or have comments to the presentation. So the way it's working is that after each presentation, I will ask you for comments and questions, and then we will continue. On top of the presentations that is here on the agenda, we do also have a presentation that is related to the activities that are going to take place in Dubai by colleagues from UAE on this issue. So they will come in also with a presentation. So that will be like a 5th presentation on top of the 4 that is mentioned here in the agenda. Now, the task team on big data for the SDGs, the objective of our work is, as we are doing today, this afternoon, is to provide concrete examples of the use of big data for the monitoring of the indicators associated with the SDGs, and also to get some kind of an overview of what is going on out there. So we have done surveys in relation to the activities at NSIs and other organizations in the UN member countries in relation to this, and we have found that in relation to 6 indicators, there are a specific use of non-traditional data, and those indicators are mentioned here on the slide. And one of the challenges is that the calculation methods that are being used in relation to this in different countries might not be transferable to to other countries in relation to those specific indicators. So one thing is to identify the areas where those indicators are used. Another thing is to come up with a more like standardized use of method in relation to the coverage of the indicators with those non-traditional data. And we will at this seminar present a few indicators that are calculated based on your. We have, as part of the UN group of experts for big data, a part of the website there is covering the activities in the task team on big data and the SDGs, and you can find it. There's a link here, but you can also just go to the UN Big Data website site and then search for SDG covered indicators, and you will get the information of what we have done in relation to the surveys and also the other informations that you can find there. And this will be launched in January, this new web page, as part of the activities that is taking part in Dubai. So I guess this is my introduction, and then we will just return to the agenda. So the next and the first presentation will be citizens generated data by Dilek Frazi. So Dilek, the floor is yours, and I'll just leave the screen for you, please.
Thank you. I'm turning on my camera, hoping that my connection is still good. And thanks for sharing my presentation on the screen. And thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this webinar. My name is Dilek Frazi, and I'm a research scholar at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, in short IASA, based in Austria. And today I'm going to talk about citizen science, or as announced, citizen-generated data and its potential contributions to SDG monitoring. Next slide, please. So to start with, I'd like to share with you some of our recent publications on the topic, which are also the basis of my presentation today. I will share the links to these papers in the chat after my talk, and they're also at the end of my slides. Next slide, please. So before I dive into the topic of how citizen science data can be useful and complementary to traditional sources of data to address the SDG data gaps, let's try to understand what the term is about actually, because there are a lot of confusions, a lot of different terms, like I'm calling it citizen science, you call it citizen generated data, for example. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, citizen science is scientific work undertaken by the members of the public and often in collaboration with or under the direction of scientists, professional scientists and scientific institutions. So although the practice of citizen science dates back to 1800s, the term citizen science is actually first used in 1995 or 1996, mostly in the environmental domain. And since then, citizen science as a field has constantly grown. And there are several technological and societal trends that can help explain this growth, such as the increased level of education and increased access to internet and technologies, such as smartphones. And as a result of this growth, of course, different definitions and terminologies have evolved to describe citizen science activities. So some examples of the terms are, you may be more familiar with the term, for instance, community-based monitoring, participatory action research, community science, volunteer geographic information, participatory mapping, and citizen-generated data being one of them, depending on which background you come from, which discipline you followed, and so on. So citizen science activities can be, for example, initiatives conducting hypothesis-driven research that is designed and led by scientists, and volunteers are involved only in data collection, for instance, or activities designed by scientists and volunteers together and involve volunteers in more than a data collection aspect of research. This could be identifying a research question and evaluating the results and many other aspects of scientific research. So in our research, what I'm presenting to you today as citizen science, we adopt an inclusive approach to all these different typologies, initiatives, and terms in our work, and describe citizen science with three main characteristics that are public participation and voluntary contribution and knowledge production. And this framework presentation is basically about all of them, bringing together all these different terms and definitions. So the reason why such diverse terms and definition exist to describe similar activities is probably because they all come to existence in different disciplines, different cultures, different geographies, and therefore reflect the context that they originate from. For example, the term citizen-generated data come from the civil society background, whereas the citizen science is more scientifically grounded. So some examples of citizen science include, for example, sharing biodiversity observations. Bird monitoring, for instance, has been going on since centuries, and measuring water or air quality, reporting on safety or violence in terms of the SDGs, identifying poverty and mapping poverty, slums, collecting litter and data from beaches and rivers, as you see in this picture now, and many, many others. Next slide, please. So in addition to data contributions to SDG monitoring, citizen science can benefit the society in various ways. For example, raising awareness of environmental and other societal issues, supporting science and scientific activities, and contributing to decision and policy making. And most importantly, citizen science is about opening science to people and empowering the public to be an essential part of action to address global challenges, which is what we need today, because the SDGs is not only about monitoring them, but also achieving results and action. And we can only mobilize this action through initiatives or through involving public in these processes and in the SDG processes in general. Next slide, please. So in terms of SDG monitoring, we believe that citizen science can offer substantial contributions, data contributions, to address the data gaps and needs in the SDG framework. And to provide evidence for this claim, we published a paper, one of the papers that I showed you in my first slide. And it includes this figure, as you see. So this figure shows the contributions of citizen science to SDG monitoring, and you see all 17 SDGs, and next to them all the indicators that they cover. So this also showed which SDG indicators can actually be supported by which citizen science initiative and how, based on the metadata and work plans of these indicators. So this was an important piece of research because the landscape of citizen science initiatives is quite complex and diverse, and it's not easy to identify citizen science initiatives that could be leveraged for SDG monitoring. So this study aimed to address that issue, actually. So now we know for which data gaps and needs, who the stakeholders to work together with within the citizen science community, and how we can build data partnerships with whom. So on this slide, green boxes show the indicators where citizen science data are already contributing to the monitoring of, and yellow boxes are the indicators where citizen science data could potentially contribute to the monitoring of. And gray boxes show the indicators where, at that time, we've done this study in 2020, we couldn't identify any ongoing and past citizen science initiatives. So our results show that citizen science is contributing to the monitoring of 5 SDG indicators and has potential to contribute to 76 other indicators. So in general, just to summarize, this shows that citizen science is already contributing and could contribute to the monitoring of 33% of the SDG indicators in the global indicator framework. Next slide, please. So we also identified that in this research, the greatest contributions from citizen science to SDG monitoring would be in SDG 15, SDG 11, SDG 3, and SDG 6, respectively. And our results also showed that the greatest input from citizen science to SDG indicators would be in environmental SDGs. And UNEP identified 92 environment-related SDG indicators. And according to the latest measuring progress report of UNEP, 58% of these environmental SDG indicators like data today. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to give you some examples of how these contributions are happening or could happen potentially. If we can start with the indicator 6.3.2, for example, proportion of bodies of water with good ambient water quality. So there's an established methodology exists for this indicator, and the data but the data are not regularly produced because this requires substantial financial and human resources related investments in order to be able to organize routine data collection activities in higher spatial and temporal resolutions. As a result, many of the least developing countries do not collect data on water quality, or they have very limited programs for this. Citizen science initiatives such as Freshwater Watch could provide contributions to the monitoring of this indicator. And through Freshwater Watch, so far, citizen scientists collected over 30,000 measurements from more than 1,200 water bodies in 32 countries. And there are other similar initiatives around the world that could actually contribute to the monitoring of this indicator in addition to Freshwater Watch. For example, according to the US National Water Quality Monitoring Council, there are more than 1,720 citizen science groups across the US carrying out such volunteer water quality monitoring activities. Next slide, please. Sdg Oasis is another project that I would like to provide as an example to you today for the monitoring of indicator 11.7.1 on the built-up area of cities that is open space for public use. So metadata of this indicator highlights that measuring how much public space a city has is one part of the measuring, but it doesn't tell anything about the quality and whether people are actually benefiting from these places. So Sdg Oasis is an app we developed at IASA, and it aims to improve the database of open urban spaces and their usage, potentially first in Vienna as part of a project we run in Vienna. And so users, there's an app to download, and users can add new spaces to this app, download the app, upload photos, rate these open spaces, and answer some questions about how safe this place was, this public space was, or whether it was clean, and some other questions. So the project is a partnership between us at IASA, University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences Vienna, and City of Vienna. So the City of Vienna aims to use the results of the project to improve their database in open public spaces and identify people's perceptions on these areas. Another example, next slide, please, is Safe City for the indicator 16.1.3, if this didn't change in the meantime. That is the proportion of population subjected to physical violence, psychological violence, and sexual violence. Safe City offers a platform where people share their personal stories of sexual harassment and abuse in public spaces. And this data then are shown as hotspots on their map, indicating trends at the local level. And the program was launched in 2012. And since then, Safe City has collected more than 13,000 reports covering India, Kenya, Nepal, and other countries. And initiatives such as Safe City are not reporting or data collection purposes only, but also for action. So they're about empowerment of people, and they show how local knowledge can and should shape policies and action. So they aim to engage society to the action of creating an environment that doesn't tolerate harassment. Next slide, please. So I could give many more examples, but our time is very limited here. If there's a particular indicator that is of interest to you, I recommend you to download the supplementary material on the same link with the mapping paper that I will share, or at the end of the slides. And there you will find the detailed results that show which citizen science initiative could support the monitoring of which indicator. And we also provided evidence for this claim in this detailed supplementary material. Next slide, please. But there's one particular example that I would like to give you today. This is important because it's a concrete implementation of our research that I was presenting today, on how citizen science data could support the monitoring of the SDGs. So with this research shared, we were very much interested in applying the results in real context. So we created a partnership with the Ghana Statistical Service, Ghana Environmental Protection Agency, UNEP, UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Thematic Research Network on Data and Statistics, SPS and Trends, maybe some of you know, Earth Challenge 2020, the Wilson Center, Ocean Conservancy, and citizen science groups such as Smart Nature Freak, Youth Volunteers Foundation, or Plastic Punch in Ghana, and many, many others. And the project was about leveraging already existing beach litter or marine litter citizen science data for the official monitoring and reporting of the SDG indicator 14.1.1b in Ghana. And this indicator is about marine litter, particularly we address the beach litter part. Next slide, please. The main achievement of the project was that citizen science data for monitoring beach litter have been integrated into the official SDG monitoring and reporting mechanisms of Ghana, which makes actually Ghana the first country to report on SDG indicator 14.1.1b and the first country to use citizen science data for that purpose. Additionally, this data will inform in the country, according to the Ghana Statistical Service and the EPA, will inform the formulation of an integrated coastal and marine management policy in Ghana, currently under development, as well as other relevant policies to address marine litter problem in general. And this particular use case has also helped to bridge local data collection efforts that are happening at a very local level with global monitoring processes of the SDGs by leveraging the SDG framework, for example. Next slide, please. And some lessons we have learned that could be helpful for other national statistical offices or the data and statistics communities who are interested in citizen science or citizen-generated data in general was that rather than initiating an activity from scratch, which could be quite resource extensive, with this project, we tapped into already existing resources, and this required fewer resources, if any, to implement the project and enable the reuse of historical data. But this doesn't necessarily mean that citizen science come for free. There's big groups and working on working with the volunteers, and of course, but in any case, these have been activities that have been already ongoing by these action groups in local communities. So we can actually leverage the data they produce for the SDGs. And by tapping into citizen science networks such as Smart Nature Freaks, Youth Volunteers Foundation of Accra, or Plastic Punch, who are already established and sustainable networks, data could be efficiently collected as part of existing activities and for the future as well, sustainably. And one of the most important other learning was that it is very important to create time and space for the government, international organizations, and CSOs to gather, to meet, and build trust, common goals, and ownership over the results. And this is what we successfully achieved in this project. We will publish the results hopefully as a scientific paper, and now we're finalizing writing process. Next slide, please. And these are the resources that I presented to you today. And for the details of the Ghana Marine Litter project, you can have a look at the story map that is here. And you will find some more detailed information in there. And then once we have the paper published, I'm happy to announce this in various networks, so you will be able to see if you want to replicate our approach for monitoring SDG indicator 14.1.1b or other indicators through using citizen science data. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to thank you all, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I will have a look at the chat if you have particular questions that I can answer now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dilek. And as Dilek said, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat, because we have additional 4 presentations, so we'll take the discussions in the chat. And the other thing is that I will, for the next presentations, intervene when you're close to having your time up by saying that you have a few minutes left in order for us to get all the get through all the presentations in the time slot that we have. So the next presentation is by Stuart Crane on the workflow process and possible applications for regional hubs. Stuart, please, the floor and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Niels, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Great. Okay, so my name is Stuart Crane. I work with UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, and I'm going to speak to you now about SDG indicator 6.6.1. And this indicator measures changes to different types of freshwater ecosystems and uses Earth observations. And UNEP is the custodian agency for this indicator. And the backstory, very briefly, is that when UNEP developed the monitoring methodology for this indicator during 2014 to 2016, and we first requested data from countries in 2017, only 18% of our UN member states were able to provide any data on this indicator. And the data that we received was of very low quality. It had very poor temporal and spatial coverage. So we had, some data on one lake or one river, but not a time series of data. And that is because monitoring environmental changes, dynamic environmental changes, is incredibly difficult for all countries in the world. And so we were faced with the situation of a global data gap for this indicator. Subsequently, we then turned to the space agencies, including the European Commission, and we looked at the possibility of monitoring freshwater ecosystems using satellite-based Earth observations. And consequently, we rewrote the monitoring methodology, which is now entirely focused on using satellite-based Earth observations. So this slide here in front of you just covers the data flow process that we are involved in. I won't go through it in detail, but essentially we receive global Earth observations per different types of freshwater ecosystem, and I'll show you that shortly. And we're able to monitor surface water on the face of the Earth very effectively and separate that out into surface waters, into a water quality measurement, and also onto specific types of ecosystems such as inland and coastal wetlands. And we receive that information and we pass that information, we package it per country and actually subnationally per basin, and we pass that out to dedicated indicator focal points in countries on a cyclical basis for their approval of that data. That information then comes back to us, and we submit that official SDG indicator through to the UN Statistics Division. So that's just the general and very brief workflow that we're involved in. Now, indicator 661 is the only indicator under target 66. And last year, when we had our most recent global data drive and national approval process, we then analyzed all of that national data up into regional and global trends, and we were able to report at several high-level international meetings, including the President of the General Assembly meeting on water. Some of the changes that we're on freshwater ecosystems that we're seeing in this data. And some of those changes look like this. We're seeing that 1 in 5 of every single river basin in the world is experiencing very rapid changes in its surface water. We're able to say that we've lost some 80% of our wetlands globally. We're able to say high-level statistics such as 1 in 4 of the large lakes that we've surveyed using this data had extreme turbidity in 2019. So these are just a few of the very high-level global trends, but this is the kind of valuable information that we've never had before that we're now able to get for this indicator because of the breadth of data that we have available to us. And we can package that data in lots of ways, and I'm going to show a little bit more detail later. But essentially, we map all of our freshwater data across the Earth, and we're able to impart information like this, where we can rapidly see those locations in the world which are experiencing changes to their freshwater ecosystems. And this is a map of river basins, and you can see that the colors on the map where you've got a light blue color is where we've seen a very rapid increase in the last 5 years compared to the last 20. And those areas on the map there where you can see highlighted in that yellow-orange color is where we've seen a rapid decrease in surface water, so drying up of river basins. So we're actually able to provide these basin level pieces of information as well as these global trends. And I've mentioned the water quality statistic earlier, where we can package that information on water quality in lots of different ways. And we have done this very recently just to try to overlay the information on these highly turbid lakes. And we can package that information with other global data sets, such as disaggregated population, to assess how many people are living in close proximity to these lakes, which are experiencing very high turbid conditions. So we're just trying, the point I'm illustrating here is that water data on its own is powerful, but it becomes even more powerful once you're able to overlay that with other meaningful global data sets, such as population. Now, the indicator data for indicator 661 is separated down per ecosystem type. So we look at large lakes, and we look at lakes and rivers, but we're also able to separate that out into water that is permanent, so water that's there all year round, from seasonal water, and also from artificial water bodies, so our reservoirs. So we're able to take that freshwater data and actually break it down, disaggregate it further into more meaningful types of freshwater ecosystems. What I'd like to illustrate on this slide is that we're using a variety of satellite data sources per sub-indicator. So you can see we're using NASA's Landsat data for our permanent seasonal and reservoir data. We're also using the European Sentinel satellites, but we're also using the Japanese SAR-based satellites to measure specific ecosystem types. Sure, this is going to work on my screen. Sorry, this one is supposed to be a short video for you. It's not going to work for some reason. The point I was going to illustrate here is that it's a huge amount of data that we're dealing with, and in fact, while the Landsat satellites are covering the surface of the Earth every couple of weeks, the European Sentinel observations were looking at every 5 days. To monitor the entire surface of the world. Every day, we have several terabytes of data, an enormous volume of data that requires processing in order to generate statistics for the indicator. These graphics here is just to sort of illustrate that satellite acquisition through to the generation of indicator statistics is a multi-partner process. It's a multi-phased workflow that requires partnerships which are long-term and unique in many ways. For example, the enormous volume of the information that we're dealing with, really UNEP could not process this information were it not that we had the valuable partnership in place with Google, who perform that cloud processing and image processing and cloud storage service for us. We also have a very strategic partnership in place with the European Commission's Joint Research Centre and others such as UNEP DHI Centre and the Global Mangrove Alliance, where we're then taking those process images and converting that into statistics. And then, of course, we have a role of transferring that information into meaningful, actionable information that assists in monitoring and reporting. Here, I just wish to very briefly illustrate that we have a very high accuracy in the information that we're providing out to our member states. We have very robust statistical methodologies that are used to extract statistics from satellite imagery. You can see on this workflow here, which was generated and published by Jean-François Paquel, who led the development of the Global Surface Water Explorer at the European Commission's Joint Research Centre, that in order for us to have an accurate observation of water, we have to take into consideration a number of factors, which include shadows, ice or glaciers, buildings, and other factors, in order to have certainty that we're actually observing water. And we have, as I say, a very high accuracy rate. And we do this for this process of analysis here for every 30 by 30 meter pixel on the surface of the water pixel that we have available for the surface of the Earth. So a real vast amount of data. As you can see, it's 1,823 terabytes of Landsat data that's been analyzed. And that analysis is able to sort of transfer itself into something meaningful if we don't just say that we can observe water and or land, but we start to map out different types of surface water, because making data actionable for countries, in order to protect and restore their freshwater ecosystems, we need to try to provide information in a way that is meaningful for them. So with the satellite data that we're using, we take this process here where we can provide sub-indicator definitions across what is either permanent water, where you have observations being made every single month of the year. So if the satellite is observing for 12 months of the year, that 30 by 30 meter pixel will be categorized as a permanent water. If it's less than 12 months of the year, we're categorizing it, but with some observations, we're categorizing it as seasonal water bodies, so temporal water bodies that might come and go. We're also then able, as I said earlier, to take what is artificial water bodies out of that natural water that we're observing. And this is particularly important when you're trying to deal with water management decisions, where, for example, you might observe in your country a decrease in your permanent water. So your lakes might be drying up and shrinking, and your reservoirs may be increasing. And if we had not separated out those two sub-indicators into natural and artificial, the management decision is very difficult. The data becomes masked. So we try to disaggregate the data as much as we can to make it meaningful for countries. And what we're also, one of the important characteristics of measuring change of different types of freshwater ecosystems, but in particular different surface water states, is that we can measure that change, that area, the extent, over very large periods of time. And this is one of the most important reasons that satellite data plays a meaningful role within indicator 661, is that we're able to look back in time. So we actually use a 5-year baseline of 2000 to 2004, and then we compare the most recent 5 years to that 5-year baseline. And we transfer that information into national administrative units and also river basin units. So we actually use the GAUL layer and the WWF hydrobasins layer. And at a national and subnational river basin level, we can start to see how freshwater bodies are transitioning between different states, i.e. water that is permanent or seasonal and moving from that state, where new water is where it's being observed, or where there once was water and it's been entirely lost. So we're actually able to provide quite an advanced level of analysis to our member states on indicator 661. And I've given you the example there of the surface water, but essentially we undertake that same process for all of the sub-indicators of indicator 661. And we have information on water quality, on mangroves, on wetlands, and we provide a national trend statistic, and then we provide a deeper layer of information around either monthly or annual or multi-annual data to allow the user to interrogate that data yet further. So here's just an example of how we share this information out to countries. So UNEP, with its partners, Google and the Commission and others, have developed a geospatial data portal, which is called the Freshwater Ecosystem Explorer. The URL is sdg661.app, and that is a free open access data portal for all countries to go and visit their data. So this is just a screenshot of Brazil. What you can see on the Statistical Dashboard is some of the information that I presented to you in a summary form. So we're giving the country long-term statistics broken down by ecosystem and then sub-indicator. And that's the summary statistics that are reported. But we then go a step further than that, and a country can zoom in right down to a 30 by 30 meter resolution to start to interrogate those summary statistics and understand exactly where subnationally those changes in freshwater are occurring. You can see just on this image here, those areas in blue is where this river is, the satellite observations along the side of the river are observing seasonal water, and the areas in orange are where permanent water is being lost. It's not telling us the reasons why, but it's simply telling us at a very accurate, high resolution, the changes that are happening between states of freshwater.
Stuart, you had
similarly
2 minutes left.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you for the prompt. I'm about 2 minutes away. Similarly, just another example here from the Freshwater Ecosystem Explorer, looking at mangroves in Brazil. You can start to pinpoint exactly where mangrove cover has been lost, exactly where new mangroves have grown, and where mangrove cover has maintained itself. And this is incredibly important at a subnational level to give this high resolution information, which would never be possible without satellite-based Earth observations. So a very, very, very powerful tool, and I hope a very illustrative example of how big data can be used effectively for the SDGs. My last couple of slides just to illustrate that there is a process that UNEP and Indicator 661 have been involved in for a number of years now in trying to ensure this integration of Earth observation within SDG implementation. And what's critical is that we can't just provide information out to countries, it has to be provided in a very meaningful way, in a variety of forms and formats. It has to be accessible, it needs to be interrogated, it needs to be downloadable, and there needs to be accompanying tools and training. So we're really moving, I think, in the right direction, and I think Indicator 661 is a great example of how we are moving in the right direction with big data for the purposes of SDG monitoring and action. But of course, it does come with some extra asks, and some of that is a need to access significant amount of computing infrastructure for processing. Okay, I can see that my time is up. So with that, I will say thank you for listening to me. I'll be very happy to answer any questions you may have. Niels, back to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Really, really interesting and impressive. There is a question in the chat, but I will suggest that you just go into the chat and answer it there, because we need to move on to the next presentation, which is on mobile phone data by Seam and Esperanza. I don't know, Seam and Esperanza, how you share, but you have like a little bit less than 10 minutes each. I don't know who of you will start.
Thank you, Niels. I will start to provide an introduction of the work, and then later on it will be Sim who will provide the information with regards to the results. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So the work that we are doing in the International Telecommunication Union with regards to mobile phone data started a while back. And more recently, we are looking specifically on the two SDG indicators that relates to the mobile phone coverage and internet use. So this work on information society indicators, these two indicators on SDGs that I will mention later on, is our contribution to the work of the task team on mobile phone data. And this task team is also looking at 5 other areas that uses mobile phone data. So I invite you to look at the website of un-cebd to explore these other areas that we are looking at using mobile phone data. So the work on information society indicators relates specifically to the ICT indicators that the ITU is responsible in the SDG monitoring framework. Specifically, we are monitoring 5 of the indicators included in the framework, and 2 of this, the 9C1, percentage of population covered by mobile network, broken down by technology, and 1781, proportion of individuals using the internet, are the 2 indicators that we explored using mobile phone data sources. So our work on mobile phone data started in ITU way back in 2016, where we explored the use cases in 6 countries: Colombia, Georgia, Kenya, Philippines, Sweden, and UAE. And there we look at 16 information and society indicators. But recently we decided to look at 2 other countries, but specifically on the 2 SDG indicators. And the idea there is to see whether mobile phone data could be used to complement data that are collected from household surveys. Specifically, the data on percentage of population using the internet is an indicator that can only be collected using an official household survey conducted by the National Statistics Office. Based on our data collection, around 100 countries collect this data from their household survey in the past 3 years, but that remains half of the world's countries not collecting this information. So we have to explore additional data sources. So we work in these countries with the telecom regulator and the ministry, the National Statistical Office, the mobile operators, as well as the Data Protection Agency. The objective of our pilot is to see whether we can develop methodology that can be used by countries to calculate these 2 SDG indicators using mobile phone data, and how this can be replicated in other countries. We also want to develop training materials that could be used to enhance capacities in national statistical offices in producing these 2 SDG indicators. And of course, we want to feature the data and the outcomes that will come from these 2 use cases. So very crucial, this mobile phone data involves access of mobile phone data sources. So we had 2 options to work on the data. The first option is where the mobile operators calculate and manipulate the data on the premises, and the resulting indicators are transferred to the regulator or to the ministry or to the national statistical offices, who in turn combine the information. And then option 2 is where the data providers provide the data to the agencies, either the national statistical offices or the regulator and ministry, and they let them calculate the indicator. So the second option is more beneficial because the calculation of the indicators are strictly following the methodologies that we developed for these 2 indicators. And so the final output of this work is summarized in a handbook on big data for measuring the information society. And this handbook will hopefully be published in the beginning of next year. So with that, I would like to pass the floor to Sim, who will provide you the results of the 2 pilots that happened in Indonesia and Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esperanza. So Sim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Esperanza, and everybody. It has been really interesting to see the other presentations as well. And you know, the Sustainable Development Goals, measuring them, taking action for them, it's a global effort, and I see that there's a lot of use for whatever we discussed here: citizen-generated data and satellite data. Those have their place, but mobile phone data has its place as well, and the SDGs will not be measured in their entirety without use of any data set that we can make use of. So here I'd like to present a few cases where mobile phone data has been used and has been successfully used. And then, of course, you can always ask questions to go down the rabbit hole on how they were used and what were the results. I'll be happy to respond, but just an introduction here. So mobile phones are with us all the time. All of us use them. They generate frequent data traces about us. Lately, we've had this COVID-19 pandemic, and this has magnified the impact that mobile data can have for policymaking, because several countries in the world understood the relevance of tracking mobility with the sensor that is that we all carry with us, which is the mobile phone, and to understand if the policies to curb the pandemic have been successful. And GSMA has estimated that 40 countries in the world, and there could be more, have already benefited from the use of mobile phone data for insights to the COVID-19 response. And this is an interesting world that we have in front of us, because this means that this kind of data set has been accessed and can be used also for measurement of the SDGs. Sorry, I think I'm having a issue with my computer. Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, do you see the slide, why mobile phone data?
Yes.
Okay, good. So why mobile phone data for SDGs? First, I think a lot of discussion about big data has been about why not, and that's because it is data generated and gathered by external parties, so it's quite hard to access privately held data and control what happens to it and how it's gathered. And these are large data sets, and they require resources to analyze them, both human and computational. And these have become barriers to adoption of these big data sets. But more and more, and as you've seen from the previous slides, there has been the impact of the benefits of MPD as well. The same barrier that it's gathered by external parties could be seen as a benefit. So since it is already gathered by telecom companies and based on global standards for collection by ITU, by GSMA, for collection, storage, and sharing, they are ready to actually be used in statistics. The large data set also comes with the benefit of a large sample coverage, and actually timeliness of the data and the data quality, which because it's a large data set, you have ways to assure quality of the data. So you cannot hide data quality problems, and you can assure that whatever you find in the data quality can be built into data collection and analysis so that you overcome those quality issues. And then granularity. So mobile phone data also offers a better degree of data granularity in terms of the time period and geographical location. And it could provide more disaggregated data. So this is why mobile phone data has been determined by the UN Committee of Experts on Big Data for Data Science and Official Statistics and the MPD task team for SDGs in 6 major areas: information society, population, tourism, migration, disaster management, and transportation. And more specifically, also with SDG indicators. But not only these indicators, but also to create the basis for policy decisions that could lead to improvement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So here I come to the big data project, because in the ITU, as this is one of the more, let's say, natural ways to use mobile phone data, using the mobile phone data itself to understand ICT usage and access. So here we did pilots in 2 countries, Indonesia and Brazil. And why we selected those countries, as already mentioned, because they have a good reference data sets from the household surveys and other administrative data, which can be referenced to. So the assumption was to check, can we measure these 2 SDG indicators with big data, compare them to survey and administrative data in these countries, and conclude that the method can be used in any country of the world. And the overall conclusion is a resounding yes. So with that said, I actually don't need to go on, because you can check the details, but for the benefit of this webinar, I'll give you a few details on the results that we saw. So as input, we used open data sources and closed privately held data sources. So basically, what goes in is population in a gridded way. So that comes from WorldPop, cell location data, whether it comes from the mobile network operator or OpenCellID database, which is an open source database, and then cleaned records from the mobile network operator as people use their mobile phone, so called and data detail records. And the output are 2 SDG indicators: population coverage of the mobile by a mobile network and individuals using the internet. So first off, what we did in Indonesia, we measured cell coverage areas in Indonesia. And we can all agree that universal access to communications technology is important. Now the question is how well we are measuring the progress and ensuring that no one is really left behind. We don't want to show progress that is not trickling down to all of the population, even in rural areas. So sometimes the numbers for this indicator have been too optimistic. We've seen it in some places. So the work done for this indicator actually is to provide independence for the National Statistical Office to verify the progress of this indicator and provide more disaggregation to the result, so that more policing can be made to provide universal access. So we also provide another level of independence by looking at how this can be done without access to privately held data sets using open source data. So if the data is not available from the mobile network operator, then use open and crowdsourced databases. And this worked. So we saw that in some areas where the mobile network operator might show a good level of coverage for all their mobile network, then after checking, it's possible to see with this disaggregated big data result that it's not always the case that, that this coverage is so good, especially for 3G and 4G technologies, which have a shorter range. So it really provided a way for the statistical office to check the data. And the statistics office, PPS, Statistics Indonesia, also for the first time sent disaggregate data for review for the voluntary national review of the SDG indicators. It was the first time they could send data that trickled down not only to province, but also to specific regional level. Lessons from Brazil. And in Brazil, we focused not only on the mobile coverage, which, as it turned out, it was also well aligned with the existing administrative data. And where it was not, it was understandable why that might be the case. But we focused mostly on measuring internet access through the mobile in Brazil. And here you can see a graph of the continuity of how subscribers are using the data connection in one of the areas, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So here you can see that over 2 months, most mobile subscribers use mobile data most of the days. So the mean subscriber uses mobile data every day. So that means that this data set was quite good for understanding also internet access in Brazil. And if we compare the two different sources of data, from the reference data, from the survey, and the mobile data, the difference was almost non-existent. Of course, we could only compare the overall region and not go down into very specific areas with the household survey data, because the sample coverage was just not there to go down more precisely. But overall, it showed good comparison. Now, with one of the main benefits of mobile phone data and big data in general is that it can measure small areas with large sample sizes. So, and this picture has been done with measuring internet access through mobile phone data, and we can have breakdowns for all these areas by access technology. You might be surprised that in rural areas of Rio de Janeiro, there are still places where for many people, the main access to internet is still 2G, so GPRS technology. And this information we would not be able to determine through surveys because the sample sizes are just not strong enough. However, once we know this information, that these areas might be lagging behind in terms of access to internet, now we can go and develop very localized surveys that check and verify this data and understand what can be done to increase the level of their internet access. So overall conclusion is that mobile phone data is a rich resource, not only for ICT statistics, but ICT does provide kind of the way to leap towards other domains where it can also be beneficial to measure SDGs directly, but also contribute to measuring SDGs and to contribute to the policy making that could raise the level of development in various areas, and most importantly, to disaggregate the data so that we can also develop those areas that are currently being left behind by the current data sources. So we're building on different data sources to make sure that we really leave no one behind. And then we have some lessons on how to start as well. And I have to mention here, this cannot be mentioned enough, that there are countries out there that are using mobile phone data for official statistics already, and also developing SDG indicators from this continuous production. And the lessons to learn from there is to set up a data pipeline. ITU is building an academic course on big data for information site indicators, which provides you all the necessary tools to implement big data for ICT, at least for these two SDG indicators in your own country. Gather the stakeholders that are necessary to implement the project and cooperate with experts and data providers that mostly are in the private sphere. And then follow best practices, and hopefully here in the mobile phone data task team and in the CBD in general, we are able to contribute with those best practices for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Esperanza. Thank you, Siim, so very much for this presentation. Very useful. So we will move on to the next presentation, which is Asushi on indicator 911. So please, Asushi, the screen and the floor is yours.
Very much. Can I share a presentation? Does it work?
Yes, we see.
Can you see?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Neil. Also, thank you very much for inviting me in this important webinar regarding the SDG indicator and big data. I'm gonna present a little bit about the rural access index the World Bank is working on with the client countries. It's very important to promote rural accessibility particularly in 11 countries. I believe there are a lot of opportunities to explore to improve our measurement of rural access index, collecting the data, and then improve the accuracy of the index, and then of course the user index in operations. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit about the background, what's the rural access index, how we want to use the index in operations, and then what is the new, what is the old methodology, and then I'm going to present a little bit the example that we already have in terms of the rural access index calculation, and then I will show some result and challenge and opportunities. As I said, there are a lot of opportunities, I believe, and then I will touch upon a little bit the operational relevance in the World Bank businesses. So in many countries, I think rural accessibility is still the significant problem, particularly in the developing countries. I believe nowadays, the many countries are experiencing the relatively rapid urbanization. However, there are a lot of people still living in rural areas where the transport accessibility is limited. And then also the vast majority of the rural people are very poor. So obviously, without the good accessibility to rural network, there are a lot of the problem, the limited opportunities for the economic development. For instance, the many people rural access do not have the accessibility to the market, and then people do not have the accessibility to the social services. For instance, the healthcare services and education. So those are the significant problem, continue the problem in developing countries. And then the question is, how do we, enhance the accessibility with the limited resources, and the resources available resources are always limited. So it's very important to identify where the accessibility is limited, and then where should we focus on our intervention project, rural project. And then the process, the evaluating the accessibility and then the programming the rural program is essentially the core business in the transport rural program in the developing countries. So globally, it is estimated 1 billion, to be more precise, 900 million people do not have access to the rural network currently. This was estimated by the Peter Roberts and the other colleagues in the World Bank in 2006. This is probably only one global indicator in terms of the rural accessibility over the world. Unfortunately, this number hasn't been updated since then. There are a lot of the challenges to update this index. But the fact is that there are a significant amount of the people who do not have access to the road network. And the rural access index is one of the few global indicators we have in the transport sector. Methodology, as I said, in 2006, the colleague in the World Bank defined the rural access index, and then that definition is well known, I believe, in the transport sector at least. That is the rural access index is basically the share of the rural population who live in 2 kilometers of the road, all-season road. Despite the definition is well known and the methodology or the kind of concept of the methodology is well defined, we have had a significant challenge to sustain this indicator globally. One of the reasons that previously we used the household survey. As you may know, the household survey is available, but it's very costly to carry out. And then also household survey, they cover only probably 200 to 400, 600 villages. So when you look at the connectivity, local connectivity in the country, this coverage is not sufficient, particularly in large countries. So small countries may be enough, but if you look at the only 400, 600 location points in a large country, it's very limited in order to understand the connectivity and the nationwide. And also as a result of this, using the household survey, we will have eventually the one number, rural access index one number for each country. So this number is very difficult to use in your operation probably. For instance, if you have rural access index 10%, 20%, whatever it is, it's useful to compare the across countries, but it's not useful to use or target your rural road program in your country. So that's one of the difficulty to sustain this rural access index using the previous the methodology. And then another difficulty is that in a household survey, you ask the people whether or not they have access to all-season road. And we're not sure the people understand this definition all-season road. Definition is already technically there, but when you ask the question, and then when you ask the 2 kilometers or approximately 25 minutes, people may or may not understand the correct measurement. So that's why there is a significant challenge to compare the result across countries, even though we have some numbers for the rural access index based on the household survey. And then now taking the advantage of this, the SDG indicators, rural access index is now officially endorsed as a indicator 9.1.1. There are other indicators, I believe, to measure this this goal. But obviously, rural access index in a development context is very consistent with the target, which aims at increase the universal access to the quality infrastructure. So obviously, in many countries, as I said, the rural access is still the problem. And then this measurement has the potential to follow up to achieve the higher level of the development. So with other donors, in collaboration with other donors, we developed and proposed a new methodology which aims to to be more sustainable. Basically, the principle is we have the 4 principles. The methodology is designed to be more sustainable, consistent, still simple, and it is very relevant to the operations. For sustainability, as I said, the data collection availability is one of the challenges and we had previously. So we maximize the use of the available data, global data. So as long as we have the data we want to use in the global data, of course, subject to the accuracy of the data. And then also we want to make sure that the consistency across the countries. To this end, we decided to use the spatial data and techniques. So rather than asking the people whether or not you have the accessibility to the network. So we are using the very objective, consistent measurement and technologies. And then result will be the comparable across the countries. Using the same method, as you can imagine, we can measure many other type of different type of the accessibility. Not only the accessibility to the road network, but also we can measure probably accessibility to the social services, for instance, schools and hospitals. But we decided to keep the same definition, which is accessibility to the road network, because this is a fundamental question in many developing countries. And then we leave the other measurement, like accessibility to hospitals and social facilities, as additional measurement. As long as we have the same database, the client country can measure different type of the accessibility, depending on the demand in the country. It's very important to make sure that the operational relevance. This is also related to the sustainability. The index is now designed, building in the operation by road authorities or Ministry of Transport. They would update the database. And then using that in the same database, the road access index can be recalculated, updated. So in that way, we make sure that the sustainability. Of course, and this is a collaboration between the donors and the developing countries. And then also, I think it's very important to make sure that the experience can be the exchange across the countries. So we have prepared a report which includes the methodology and some experience pilot countries. So if you are interested in more, you can take a look at it.
Suji, I can see that you have approximately 10 slides left, but unfortunately you only have like a few minutes, so maybe you can make kind of priority. Yeah. And as we said in the introduction, we will be able to go more into detail with this stuff when we come to Dubai.
Of course. So just to illustrate the methodology, we overlap the spatial data where people live. There are a lot of the global data, so we're going to take a look at what data is available. And then we already know that there is also spatial data representing the urban rural classification. National country, of course, and they may have their own definition, and also global data is available. And then many countries, we already know where the road exists. So again, the national country, the road authority already have their database. Also, there are a lot of the open data, OpenStreetMap, for instance. So depending on the demand and the coverage accuracy, the consistency with the country classification, one of them can be used. And the road agency already, I believe, know that the road condition, that this database is the core, the fundamental part of the rural access index. The road authority updated the road condition data, and then using that data, we can use we can calculate the rural access index by product. And where the road condition data comes from, there are large wide range of the technology. The traditional one, the vehicle profiler, like you can drive and then you can collect all the information on the pavement, and then also you can use the mobile phone, detecting the roughness of the road, and then also you can use a drone. Probably we discussed before, like the mobile phone. I think it's one way to collect the people's mobility using the mobile phone, call detailed record. So that's another possibility. And then you can use a satellite image. There's a possibility, and there's some pilot project already there. So just to illustrate the result, one of the results, this is the case of the Ethiopia. We know the population distribution. We know where road exists. We know the road condition. And this comes from the database from the road agency, Ministry of Transport, for instance. And then we calculate it virtually, not rather than going to the on the ground. That virtually we can calculate the road access index. Important, it's available at some national level. Using this, the valuation within the country, we can develop the effective good road programs in the country. And then I see already some experience or the project already in some countries. For instance, in Madagascar, we can see clear correlation between the rural access index poverty. So using the rural access index, we can develop the rural road program to reduce the poverty in a country. So finally, just rapidly, this is I believe the good cycle of the rural access index. You collected the information in your operation, and then define the methodology, and then you will formulate a rural road program, and then you update the rural access index. Some roads they improved, but other parts may be detail related. Eventually, the next 3-5 years, you will come back the rural access index updated. So this is, I think it's important the opportunity to use new technologies to sustain the rural program as well as rural access index calculation. So let me stop here. There are a lot of the materials in our World Bank website. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now we will move on to the last but not the least presentation by Gaia Al-Midfa from UAE on the journey towards the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So Gaia, the floor and the screen is yours as soon as Aisha stops sharing this.
Thank you, Niels. Will I be sharing the slides from my side?
I don't know.
I can do that.
You can, yeah.
Yes.
You can do that.
Sure.
That's good.
Okay, is it showing?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd first like to start off by introducing myself. My name is Gaia Al-Midfa, and I'm representing the Federal Competitiveness and Statistics Center today. And I'm very happy to be here with you all today to share with you a part of UAE's journey towards achieving the SDGs. So far, since we still have around 8 years to go. And my focus today would be on the institutional mechanisms that have been put in place to facilitate the implementation of those goals on a national level. So sustainability has been a critical focus of policymaking for the UAE, and its commitment to the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda remains a priority as the country pursues its economic, social, and environmental development. Therefore, one of the first steps that the UAE took to ensure the implementation of the goals and the efficient monitoring and following up takes place across all of them was to form a national committee on SDGs. which was formed by UAE Cabinet Decree in 2017 and is chaired by Her Excellency Rimet Ibrahim Al-Hashmi, Minister of State of International Cooperation. And the FCSC, the Federal Competitiveness and Statistics Center, in its role, works as the secretariat of the committee. Now, the committee is comprised of different federal entities, around 14 federal entities, and they are considered custodians of the goals that are mapped to their mandate, or supporting agencies to custodian agencies. And within their responsibility of assigning a national plan comes identifying priority targets and ensuring proper coordination takes place to assess data availability and to close necessary data gaps. In addition to the formation of the National Committee, the Secretariat also in 2017 noticed a gap in the public-private partnership in the UAE to ensure the achievement of the goals across all sectors, and therefore it also formed a private sector advisory council on SDGs, which consists of some of the biggest companies in the UAE, 14 different companies, the likes of A'mar, Majid Al Futtaim, DP World, A.T. Kearney, and more. And the council over the three past years focused on identifying potential partnerships between the government and between the private sector to develop necessary policy reforms, initiatives, and also to discuss private-public data sharing and how it can be expanded for greater SDG achievement in the UAE. So one of the outcomes of those public-private efforts have been through the publication of a report on public-private data sharing in partnership with A.T. Kearney and members of the Private Sector Advisory Council. And the report outlines the main data-related barriers and tracking process on the SDGs and ways in which the private sector can collaborate with the government to increase sustainability disclosure. And as you can see over here, the findings were based on survey and interview insights from the different private companies within the Private Sector Advisory Council. And the report came with recommendations, 5 main recommendations, and they are as follows: to collaborate to create a voluntary policy for data sharing that reflects both parties, to leverage collective perspectives on sustainability taxonomy, to build a standardized model for data sharing, to identify entities for partnership to implement data sharing model, to implement a secure data exchange layer, and to increase the publicity of SDG developments in English media outlets. For those interested to learn more about the report, I encourage you to access our FCSC website, fcsc.gov.ae, and you will find the report under publications. Another outcome of the engagement between the Private Sector Advisory Council and the National Committee was through the launch of a voluntary initiative that the UAE private sector companies have voluntarily chosen to work on or to work together on to increase the representation of women in middle and senior management roles. And this mainly targets SDG 5.5. And this will be established as an agreement through signing a gender balance acceleration pledge in partnership with the UAE Gender Balance Council. So there will be 18 different companies who will sign this pledge, inshallah, in January during the SDGs in Action, which will take place in Expo 2020. So those are some of the snippets of UAE's efforts on a national level. I'd also like to give or shed light on its international efforts. You may have known that UAE is ranked 5th globally in OECD's official development assistance, and as part of its foreign assistance strategy, it has mapped its pillars to the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And therefore, within its UAE foreign assistance in 2019, which amounted to 29.4 billion dirhams, the UAE ensured assigning or mapping those to the different goals that are shown on the screen. Goal number 8, 17, 2, 9, and 11, with the biggest portion going to goal number 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a short summary on UAE's efforts on achieving the SDGs, both nationally and internationally. Thank you for your time and your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. This was really interesting, and thank you also to all the presenters. In some way, this was a pre-taste of what we will be able to meet on and discuss further and dig more into details in relation to when we meet in Dubai in late January. So I just want to close by thanking everybody for participating, for the questions in the chat, and also for the presentations, and the possibility, of course, also after this to reach out to each other. I think we have a rich and inspiring material here that can be used also by others. So thank you very much for your time, and look forward to see you all in Dubai in January. Have a nice day, evening, or maybe even morning. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.